Thomas McAllister was 68 years old when the old wooden bridge on Clearwater Road collapsed beneath him, and for several long minutes, no one in Clearwater County, Idaho, knew he was down there. The rain had started before sunset, the cold kind that sinks into the dirt and turns every back road into a slick, silent trap. Locals knew the Clearwater River rose fast after storms, but Thomas had driven that route for more than 40 years. He trusted it. Everyone did. At 9:42 p.m., the right support beam of the South Fork Bridge finally gave out. The structure twisted, snapped, and dropped his Chevy pickup into the ravine below. The truck hit the riverbank sideways, crushing the passenger door and pinning his left leg beneath the steering column. The rain didn't stop. It thickened. Each cold drop tapped the shattered windshield and ran down the glass like thin silver threads. The river kept rising, slow but steady, pushing branches and debris against the broken frame of the bridge above him. Thomas tried reaching his phone, but the screen shattered when the truck landed. When he pressed the power button, all he saw was a flicker of white light and a crack spreading across the display. The small, sharp click it made told him he wouldn't be calling anyone. The cab was filling with water, 1 inch at a time. His breath fogged the air. His hands were shaking from the cold, and the pressure in his trapped leg felt like fire crawling through the bone. Above him, the remaining planks of the bridge groaned, threatening to collapse the rest of the way. Most men his age wouldn't have survived the next hour. Thomas survived the night. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I'd like to know who's out there listening. For most of his life, Thomas McAllister avoided the kind of trouble that fills the local newspapers in rural Idaho. He wasn't the type who chased danger or ignored warnings. At 68, he preferred steady routines, early mornings, quiet dinners, slow drives through the forest roads he'd known since boyhood. Thomas lived alone in a small house outside Pierce, a logging town tucked between stretches of dense pines and the winding Clearwater River. His wife, Marlene, had passed away 8 years earlier, and since then he had adjusted to a life marked by silence and familiar habits: coffee at dawn, feeding the neighbors' dogs when they wandered into his yard, short drives into town for groceries or hardware. Nothing unusual, nothing risky. He had worked as a mill mechanic for most of his adult life, and though his hair had turned gray long ago, his hands still carried the roughness of someone who spent decades tightening bolts, replacing belts, and fixing machines that weighed more than small cars. He moved slower now, not weak, just deliberate. The kind of deliberate that comes from age, not fragility. On the evening of the accident, Thomas drove into town to pick up a replacement part for his old generator. A storm was forming over the ridgeline, and rain had already begun tapping against the metal roofing of the hardware store by the time he paid and stepped back outside. The clerk warned him that the back roads could get messy quickly, but Thomas had seen countless storms come and go. The South Fork Bridge had held through worse. He checked the sky before getting into his truck. The clouds didn't look friendly, but the trip home was short. 15 minutes, maybe 20 if the roads were soft. He planned to take Clearwater Road, the route he trusted the most, a narrow path of aging asphalt bordered by tall trees and the river running parallel on the right. Nothing about the drive felt dangerous at first. The rain fell steadily but without fury. The windshield wipers hummed back and forth, their rhythm familiar and almost comforting. Thomas kept a cautious speed, hands firm on the wheel, eyes moving between the mirrors and the winding road ahead. He had no reason to expect that the bridge, the same bridge he'd crossed hundreds of times, was failing under the weight of the storm. The first sign that something was wrong came as a sound, a deep, wooden groan that rose above the rain. Thomas heard it through the cab of the truck, low and unnatural, like an old barn beam twisting under too much weight. He lifted his foot from the accelerator and scanned the headlights over the slick boards of the South Fork Bridge. The bridge had always looked tired, especially in winter months, but tired didn't mean unsafe. Not here, not in Clearwater County, where the cost of rebuilding was always postponed, and the old structures carried the burden of decades. Thomas eased forward, his truck tires spreading a thin sheet of water with each rotation. Then the sound came again, louder this time, sharper, almost like something snapping beneath him. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The rain blurred the edges of the road, and the river below roared louder than he remembered. He slowed to barely a crawl. That's when the right side of the bridge dropped. For a split second, the world jerked sideways. The truck tilted hard right, the headlights cutting a diagonal path down toward the rushing water. Thomas tried to steer left, but the planks gave way beneath the wheels. Gravity took over. The pickup slid, groaned, and dropped through the collapsing structure. The impact came fast, a violent sideways slam that threw Thomas against the driver's window. The glass cracked but didn't break. His left leg shot forward on instinct, bracing hard against the floorboard. The steering column folded downward from the force, pinning his shin in place. Pain exploded through him, bright and immediate. The truck landed at an angle between the riverbank and a cluster of wet, jutting rocks. Mud splashed across the windshield. Rain rushed in through a long fracture line that spread across the passenger side glass. For a moment, all Thomas heard was the rain and the ringing in his ears. He tried to pull his leg free, but the metal held him fast. Every movement sent pain crawling up his thigh. He leaned back, breathed through his teeth, and let the shock settle. He knew better than to move too fast. Injuries felt worse when panic took over, and at his age, a bad decision could be final. Above him, the remains of the bridge groaned again. A chunk of wood fell onto the hood, bouncing off the bent metal with a hollow thud. He flinched, then reached for the phone he had tucked into the cup holder. When his fingers brushed it, the phone slid to the floor. He cursed under his breath, a rare thing for him, and leaned as far right as he could to retrieve it. The screen was black. A spiderweb of cracks ran from corner to corner, the backlight flickering once when he pressed the power button. Then, nothing. No signal, no brightness, no chance to call for help. He held the phone for a moment, feeling the weight of that reality. Rainwater pooled on the floor of the cab, gathering around the edges of the mats. The river below surged upward, carrying branches and leaves that slapped against the underside of the tilted vehicle. The cold crept in quickly, numbing his trapped leg first, then spreading across his hands and arms. Thomas checked his surroundings with deliberate slowness. He tested each point of pressure against the steering column. His leg was pinned from the ankle to just below the knee, not crushed, but locked in place. The pain sharpened when he twisted, a sign the nerves were alive and the bone likely intact. But if the river rose much more, the trapped leg would be the least of his problems. He leaned back against the seat, breathing in short, steady pulls. The truck groaned with every shift of water beneath it. He could feel the chassis settling deeper into the mud. If it slipped another 2 feet, the passenger side would submerge completely. A gust of wind shook the broken bridge above him, knocking loose another plank that splintered as it hit the rocks. Thomas flinched again. The storm wasn't slowing. Lightning lit up the tree line on the far side of the ravine, flashing white against the wet bark. Thunder followed, rolling over the valley like distant artillery. He wiped the inside of the windshield with his sleeve, clearing just enough fog to see the slope of the ravine. If he could free his leg, he might climb out. The incline wasn't steep, but the rain turned everything into mud. One slip and he'd go back into the rising river. Thomas reached down again, pushing against the steering wheel column, trying to lift it just enough to pull his leg back. The metal didn't budge. His hands slipped on the wet surface, scraping his knuckles. He swallowed, braced again, and pushed harder, but the column refused to move. Pain pulsed up his leg, throbbing in time with his heartbeat. He closed his eyes against it, letting the moment pass. He knew he needed to conserve strength. This wasn't going to be resolved in minutes. This was going to be a long night. The river rose another inch. Thomas forced himself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale as the rain tapped against the broken windshield. He knew shock could cloud judgment, and judgment was the only thing he still had control over. His leg wasn't free, the river was rising, the truck was tilting, but he was alive, alert, and still capable of making choices that mattered. The first decision was simple in theory and brutal in practice. Stay still and conserve strength, or fight the pain and try to break free immediately. Every survival manual he had read over the years, most of them during his time maintaining machinery alone in isolated mill outposts, told the same story. Rushing decisions killed people. He leaned forward slowly, testing the angle of his leg. The pressure from the steering column wasn't crushing the bone, but it locked the lower part of his leg in a vise of bent metal. If he forced himself out, he risked tearing muscle or fracturing something that would make climbing the ravine impossible. He couldn't afford that. He checked the door next. The driver's side frame was bent but not completely jammed. He pressed the handle and pushed. The door opened only 3 inches, before scraping the mud and stopping. He tried again with more force. It gained another inch, enough to let more cold air in, but nowhere close to an exit. Thomas wiped rainwater off his face with the back of his hand. The smell of wet soil and river moss drifted through the cracked windshield. The rising water sloshed against the floor of the cab, swirling around his boots. He lifted his free foot to keep it above the surface, resting it awkwardly on the center console. He needed information. How fast was the river rising? He looked down at the interior panel of the truck, marking the current waterline with the edge of his thumb. Then he closed his eyes and waited for the next surge. This time, the water rose almost half an inch. Too fast. Much too fast. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the ravine for a split second. In that short burst, he saw the steep slope, the wet rocks, the thick mud, and the broken bridge looming overhead like a skeleton. If the rest of the structure fell, it would land directly on the roof of the truck. Thomas weighed his options. If he waited for help, he'd drown or freeze. Nobody knew he was on this road. He didn't live with family. No one expected him home at any particular hour. Even if a driver passed by, they wouldn't see his truck from the road. The ravine was too deep, the angle too sharp. He needed to get his leg free. That was the central truth. Everything else, the river, the storm, the cold, came second. If he didn't free his leg within the next hour, the rising water would do the job for him, and not in a way he could survive. He leaned back and looked at the dashboard. One of the metal brackets under the steering column had bent inward when the truck landed. If he could bend it outward, even by a few degrees, he might gain just enough space to slide his leg out. He felt along the edges until he found the point where the metal had folded. His left hand braced under the wheel. His right pushed against the bent bracket. Pain flared up his trapped leg as he shifted, but he gritted his teeth and held steady. He exhaled and pushed. The metal groaned but didn't move. He tried again, adjusting his grip, forcing his shoulder against the steering wheel for leverage. The metal flexed, barely, but enough to give him hope. He paused to recover his breath. His chest rose and fell in quick bursts as adrenaline surged through him. Then he pushed again, harder this time. His shoulder strained. His fingers slipped once, then found grip again. Slowly, painfully slowly, the metal bent outward. The movement was small, but it was real. He stopped to catch his breath and looked down. Maybe a quarter of an inch gained. Not enough, but better than nothing. He rested his head against the seat and let the shaking in his hands settle. A sudden crack sounded overhead. A piece of the bridge's railing snapped loose and crashed into the river beside the truck. The splash was heavy. The sound echoed off the walls of the ravine. Thomas jerked upright, heart pounding. He had no idea how much more the bridge would hold. The storm was worsening, the wind pushing the rain sideways. Water streamed down the slope, feeding into the river and accelerating the rise. If the truck shifted even slightly, the passenger side would drop fully underwater. He tried the metal again. His hands were numb, his knuckles scraped raw from earlier attempts. But he didn't stop. The bracket moved another fraction of an inch. He pushed again, harder, grunting against the resistance. A sharp pain shot from his trapped leg up to his hip. He clenched his jaw and kept going. Finally, he heard it, a tiny but unmistakable sound. The metal gave way with a soft metallic ping. The steering column lifted just barely above his shin. Not enough to free the leg entirely, but enough for him to pull, enough to try. Thomas braced both hands on the seat and pulled his leg backward. The pain was immediate and blinding. He stopped, breathed through it, and tried again. This time the movement was microscopic, but it was movement. He closed his eyes for a moment. He knew the truth. Freeing the leg would hurt more than anything he had dealt with in years, but it was pain he could survive. The river climbing into the cab, that was something he couldn't. He pulled again, harder. The metal scraped against his boot. His leg slid back a quarter inch. He inhaled sharply, gripping the seat until his fingers hurt. The water reached his calf now. Time was running out. He didn't have the luxury of waiting for the pain to pass. He pushed forward with his hands once more, lifting the steering wheel with every ounce of strength he had left. Then he yanked his leg backward in one desperate, agonizing movement. The pain tore through him. He almost blacked out. But when he looked down, his leg was free, swollen, scraped, shaking uncontrollably, but free. Freeing his leg should have felt like a victory, but the relief was brief. The moment Thomas pulled himself upright, A wave of dizziness swept through him. His heart thudded hard against his ribs. The cold had been climbing his body for nearly an hour, and now that he had moved, he felt how deep it had sunk. He pressed both hands against the dashboard and waited for the spinning in his vision to settle. The rain kept its steady rhythm against the shattered windshield. The truck creaked beneath him, shifting slightly in the mud. A reminder, he wasn't safe just because he was no longer trapped. His left leg trembled uncontrollably when he tried to move it. The boot felt tight, swelling. He touched the area gently. The pain was sharp but localized, probably no major fracture. But the injury would slow him down. Climbing out of the ravine would require balance he didn't yet have. Thomas looked through the cracked glass toward the slope. The mud was thick and dark, already streaming downward in thin rivulets from the constant rain. The incline wasn't steep enough to kill him if he slipped, but it was steep enough to drag him straight into the cold, fast-moving water below. The interior of the truck was now soaked nearly up to his shins. He shifted his good leg onto the seat and pulled the injured one slowly upward, resting it beside him. The wet fabric clung to his skin, pulling heat from him with every second. He needed to warm up. Hypothermia didn't arrive suddenly. It crept, inch by inch, like the river rising below him. He looked around the cab for anything useful. The old flannel jacket behind the seat, the spare rag near the console, the emergency flashlight in the glove box. He reached for the jacket first. The fabric was damp, but not soaked. He wrapped it around his shoulders, pulling it tight. Then he grabbed the rag and folded it over his injured leg, hoping it would trap whatever heat he had left. He opened the glove box next. Papers spilled out, insurance forms, a faded map of Idaho, a small plastic container with matches. He grabbed the matches instinctively before realizing the truth. The rain had turned the entire environment into a wet tomb. There was no chance of lighting anything out here. Still, having them made him feel less defenseless, even if only psychologically. He put the matches in his jacket pocket and focused on the flashlight. When he clicked it, a weak beam flickered on, dim but steady. At least he wouldn't be climbing in complete darkness. Thunder rumbled overhead, rolling across the valley. A gust of wind shook the broken bridge remains, sending small pieces of wood tumbling down the slope. One piece hit the hood of the truck with a wet slap. Thomas flinched, then steadied himself. He tested his injured leg again, slowly lowering it back to the floor. The pain was tolerable, as long as he didn't put full weight on it. He could climb, carefully, if he used his hands and good leg for support. The flashlight beam tested the angle of the slope again, and he mapped out a path in his mind. Rocks first, then roots, then the narrow ledge near the old cedar. But the river was rising faster now. Water lapped at the bottom edge of the passenger seat. He didn't have long. He reached for the door handle. The door groaned loudly as he pushed it. Mud pressed against the lower half, resisting him. Thomas leaned his weight into it, using his shoulder to pry it open. Inch by inch it moved. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth and the roar of the swollen river. He held the door open with his hip and aimed the flashlight toward the ground outside. The mud looked treacherous, slick, deep, ready to swallow his boots. He told himself the truth plainly. If I slip, I won't get back up. He eased his good leg out first, testing the stability of the ground. It held, barely. The mud compressed under his boot like a sponge. He shifted weight onto it, slowly, gripping the doorframe with both hands. Then he moved his injured leg, lowering it carefully. It buckled immediately under the strain, sending a spike of pain through his thigh. He caught himself with one hand on the seat, breathing hard. He tried again, slower this time, placing only the toe of his boot onto the mud. Finally, he was standing outside the truck, hunched, shaking, rain pounding against his back. The river roared directly to his right, only a few feet below. The current was fast enough to drag him under in seconds. He looked up at the slope. Water streamed down the mud, carving small channels that reflected the flashlight beam. It looked impossible. It wasn't, but it looked like it. He planted one hand against a large rock at the base of the incline. With his other hand, he gripped a cluster of wet grass. He shifted his weight forward and took his first step upward. His injured leg shook violently, but the traction held. He pulled himself another step higher, then another. Each movement felt like a negotiation between the mud and gravity. The rain made everything slick, but the roots embedded in the soil gave him something to cling to. Halfway up the slope, a strong gust of wind nearly knocked him backward. He pressed his chest against the mud, flattening himself against the incline until the wind subsided. His heart hammered. His arms trembled from strain. He angled his body toward a cluster of exposed roots. Using them as handholds, he climbed slowly, dragging his injured leg with him. His breathing became loud, raspy. Every muscle felt like it was burning. Thunder cracked again. The flashlight flickered. For a terrifying moment he thought it might die, but it stabilized, the beam returning to its dim but steady glow. Rainwater streamed down the slope and over his hands. His fingers were numb, stiff, barely closing around each root. He knew he was losing heat too quickly. If he didn't reach the top soon, he wouldn't have the strength to keep climbing. He pushed again, pulling himself another foot higher. The ravine floor was far below now. The truck a small bent shape against the river. He heard something shift in the darkness, a scraping sound. The truck moved. The river tugged at it harder. He didn't look back. Thomas focused on the next route, the next foothold, the next patch of mud that held enough stability to support him. His injured leg throbbed rhythmically. Pain, pulse, but he kept moving. At last, his hand closed around the base of the old cedar he had seen from below. Its bark was wet and rough but solid. He clung to it like a lifeline and hauled himself upward one final time. He rolled onto the flat ground above the ravine, landing on his back, chest heaving. The rain hit his face, cold and relentless. He stared at the sky for a moment, grey, shifting, merciless, and let the relief wash through him. He had escaped the ravine, but the night was far from over. For several minutes, Thomas lay flat on the ground, breathing hard, letting the rain fall across his face as his heart slowed from a frantic thud to something he could manage. Climbing out of the ravine had drained him in a way he hadn't felt in years. His arms trembled uncontrollably, and his injured leg pulsed with deep, throbbing fire. He turned onto his side and pushed himself upright. The world swayed for a moment, tilting like the truck had, but he steadied himself by gripping the base of the cedar. He had made it out. That much he had won. But now came the harder truth. Getting out of the ravine didn't mean safety. It only meant the next stage of the night. The storm wasn't easing. Wind pushed the treetops into restless motion, and rain surged sideways with enough force to sting his face. Thomas wiped water from his eyes and looked around. The stretch of forest above the ravine was unfamiliar in the darkness. He knew Clearwater Road had to be somewhere uphill, but without the headlights from the truck, everything looked like the same endless mass of trees and mud. He shone his flashlight upward. The beam barely cut through the rain, but he could see the faint outline of the hillside continuing at a gradual incline. The road wasn't far, maybe 200 yards, but distance in weather like this didn't act like normal distance. Every step would feel multiplied. He pulled the damp flannel jacket tighter around his shoulders. His body was shaking too much. He needed to move not to cover ground, but to stay warm. Hypothermia was a quiet predator, and he had already given it too much of a head start. Thomas planted his good foot forward, testing the ground. Mud sucked at his boot, but he stayed upright. He leaned on the cedar, shifted weight to his injured leg, and winced at the sharp sting that shot through it. He couldn't walk normally. He would have to limp, slowly, one controlled step at a time. He began moving uphill, dragging his injured leg with each stride. The flashlight beam jittered across the wet ground with every step, showing roots, slick leaves, broken twigs, all threats to balance. He kept his movements deliberate, knowing a single fall could end the night for good. "Just keep going," he muttered under his breath, though the wind swallowed the words. Talking gave him focus. It reminded him he was still in control of something, even if it was just the sound of his own voice. After several steps, he stopped to rest against a tree trunk. His breath fogged in the dim light as he exhaled. The cold was biting deeper now, burrowing through the wet fabric of his jacket and shirt. His fingers were stiff, barely bending. He flexed them repeatedly, but their sluggishness scared him. He pushed forward again. The incline steepened. Water ran downhill in small, rushing patterns, soaking his boots. His injured leg dragged in the mud, leaving a long, uneven trail behind him. Each step felt heavier than the last. A few minutes later, though it felt like far longer, he reached a patch of fir trees that shielded him from the worst of the wind. The branches created a weak canopy overhead, quieting the hammering of rain just enough for him to hear himself think again. He leaned against one of the firs, trying to catch his breath. His heart pounded hard, uneven. His skin felt cold in a way that no longer stung. A dangerous sign. Stinging cold was manageable. Numb cold was death creeping closer. He knew the symptoms. He'd read about cases like this. When he worked alone in remote mill sites, the safety manuals drilled the dangers of winter exposure into every worker. Shaking, confusion, loss of coordination, dropping core temperature, then the quiet slide into unconsciousness. He pushed away from the tree and kept moving. The forest floor sloped upward in a more forgiving angle ahead. He used his flashlight to scan for landmarks. Finally, through the rain, he saw something familiar, a fence post, worn and crooked, half buried in weeds. It marked the lower boundary of Clearwater Road. Relief hit him hard, almost enough to make his knees buckle. The road was close. He only had to reach the post, follow the incline, and he'd be standing on asphalt again. Whether anyone would pass during the storm was another question entirely. But one problem at a time. Thomas limped forward faster now, driven by the sight of something recognizable. His injured leg screamed with every stride, but he ignored it. Pain meant he was still conscious, still fighting. Halfway to the fence post, his foot slipped. His body lurched sideways, and he barely caught himself on a low branch. His flashlight fell from his hand and rolled 3 yards downhill, beam spinning wildly across the mud. He froze, panic tightening his chest. The forest without light felt immediate and predatory. He stared at the flashlight, willing his legs to move. Then he gritted his teeth and made his way toward it, step by agonizing step, until he crouched low and grabbed it again. When he straightened back up, he felt a deep ache spread across his back. The exertion was wearing him down. He leaned on the nearest tree and forced slow breaths into his lungs. "Keep going," he whispered again. He resumed the climb, moving toward the fence post. When he reached it, he pressed a hand against the worn wood, grounding himself. The post felt solid, familiar, stable, a reminder that he wasn't lost. He was almost safe. Lightning lit the area with a brief white flash. In that moment, he saw the road clearly, a narrow strip of asphalt curving between the trees, slick and empty. The surface glistened from the rain, reflecting faint silver and blue. He stepped over the broken wire of the fence and pulled himself onto the flat shoulder of the road. The asphalt felt strange under his boots, too hard, too level, after so long fighting the mud and slope. Thomas scanned the empty road in both directions. There were no headlights, no sounds of engines, no distant glow of approaching vehicles. The storm had driven everyone indoors. Clearwater Road was deserted. His flashlight flickered again, warning him the battery was fading. He looked toward the direction of town. It was nearly 2 miles away. In the best conditions, he could walk it in 40 minutes. In this storm, injured and freezing, he wasn't sure he could make it. He considered staying near the road and waiting for a passing car, but the chances were low, and the cold was worsening. Standing still would kill him faster than walking. He straightened his back, adjusted the jacket around his shoulders, and limped forward along the asphalt. Each step echoed lightly under the rainfall, a slow, uneven rhythm. The wind howled across the tree line, pushing sheets of rain sideways. He lowered his head and walked through it, one painful step at a time. His breath fogged in the cold air. His hands felt like stones. His injured leg dragged weakly with every stride. The darkness pressed in around him, and the silence between thunderclaps felt heavier than the storm itself. But he kept going, because the only thing more dangerous than the cold was stopping. He walked on, limping, shivering, fighting the storm, with 2 miles of empty road between him and any chance of survival. Thomas had walked less than a quarter mile when the storm shifted. The rain grew heavier, colder, falling in sheets that made the edges of the road blur into darkness. His jacket clung to him like wet paper. His teeth chattered uncontrollably. Each breath shook his chest. His injured leg hurt with every step, but the pain was losing its sharpness. It felt distant now, a dull, spreading numbness that crawled from his shin up to his thigh. He knew what that meant. The cold was stealing his ability to feel, and once the feeling was gone completely, movement would follow. He tightened his jaw and forced himself onward. The road curved gently to the left. Lightning flashed, revealing the meadow on the right, tall, soaked grass bending in the wind, and the dense wall of trees on the left. He had walked this road hundreds of times before, but tonight it felt unfamiliar, endless. After another minute, a strong gust of wind nearly shoved him off balance. He staggered sideways, catching himself with one hand against the wet asphalt. His flashlight beam jerked wildly, reflecting off puddles like scattered pieces of broken glass. He pushed himself back upright. His breathing came in rough, uneven pulls, each inhale tight and painful. He wiped rain from his eyes and forced his legs forward again. A distant sound echoed behind him, a long, creaking groan. He turned his head just enough to look back. In the faint light of the storm, he saw the silhouette of the broken South Fork Bridge. Another section of it gave way, collapsing into the ravine with a roar swallowed by thunder. The ground trembled slightly beneath his boots. The river must have surged again. If he'd still been down there, he wouldn't be standing on the road right now. The thought gave him a small burst of strength, not relief exactly, but resolve. He kept walking, limping heavily, dragging his injured leg. His flashlight flickered again. The beam shrank, weakened, then steadied. Battery dying. He tapped the side of the light with numb fingers. It bought him a few more seconds of brightness. The road ahead was pitch black, except for the faint glow from the storm clouds. The rain distorted everything, turning the world into shifting grey shapes. But he knew the landmarks. He knew the distance. He just needed to keep moving. After several more minutes, or what felt like half an hour, Thomas began to lose track of time. His mind felt slower, fuzzier. He stumbled once, catching himself awkwardly with his good leg. He forced his thoughts to sharpen. He muttered his address out loud, then his name, then the year. Survival manuals recommended it. Talk to stay awake, talk to stay oriented, talk to keep the brain engaged. Thomas McAllister, he said through chattering teeth, 68 years old, Clearwater Road, just keep walking. His breath fogged thickly. His hands no longer felt like hands. They were just cold weights attached to his arms. His boots squished with every step, filled with icy water. He saw something ahead, a faint shape through the curtain of rain. For a moment, he thought it was a hallucination. Then, lightning flashed again, and the shape became clear. An old wooden sign, Perez, 1 mile. He exhaled a shaky breath. A mile never looked so daunting, but a mile was survivable. A mile meant houses, light, heat, people. He forced himself forward. Each step felt like lifting anchors tied to his legs. His injured leg buckled twice, nearly dropping him to the asphalt. He bit down on the inside of his cheek, welcoming the sting of pain. Pain meant consciousness. Pain meant movement was still possible. His flashlight finally gave out. The beam sputtered once, twice, then died completely. The darkness swallowed him. Only lightning gave him brief, fragmented glimpses of the road. He tucked the dead flashlight into his jacket pocket and continued by memory. He kept his right hand brushing the edge of the tree line, using the rough bark of pines as a guide. The rain washed over him in relentless waves. His body shivered harder. His knees felt weak. His lips were beginning to go numb. Every warning sign of hypothermia was there. He whispered to himself again, "Don't stop. Don't sit. Don't rest," because he knew the truth. Sitting to catch his breath could mean never standing again. He saw another tiny flash of light ahead. Not lightning this time, warmer, steadier. A porch light. Small, distant, faint through the storm, but real. He angled himself toward it, dragging his injured leg through puddles that swallowed his boots. The edges of his vision blurred. His hearing dimmed. The rain felt quieter somehow, like it was falling farther away. He stumbled onto a patch of gravel, the driveway of the farmhouse. His legs trembled uncontrollably. He reached for the fence beside him but missed, his hand closing on empty air. He collapsed to one knee. Pain shot through his injured leg, snapping his mind back into focus for a moment. He pressed both hands against the ground and forced himself upright. The porch light glowed ahead, haloed by rainfall. He limped toward it, leaving a staggered trail of footprints in the mud. The steps creaked under his weight as he clung to the railing. He lifted one hand and knocked on the door, a weak, muffled knock that barely made a sound. He tried again, harder this time. The wood vibrated under his fist. He waited, chest heaving, rain streaming from his jacket. For a moment, nothing happened. The house stayed silent. He feared no one was home, or worse. that he would collapse before they reached the door. Then he heard movement inside. Footsteps, a lock turning. The door opened 2 inches, letting out a warm spill of yellow light. A voice, startled, confused, said, "Sir, are you all right?" Thomas opened his mouth to answer, but words didn't come. His legs gave out completely. The porch rushed up to meet him. He didn't feel the impact, but he was finally out of the storm. Thomas McAllister spent 3 days in Clearwater County Medical Center after the rescue. His body temperature was dangerously low when the farmers brought him inside, and the swelling in his injured leg lasted for weeks. But he survived, not because of luck alone, but because he refused to stop moving even when his body begged him to. The South Fork Bridge was inspected the following morning. Investigators found rot deep inside the support beams, hidden beneath layers of weathered wood. The county had flagged it for repair 6 years earlier, but funding delays kept pushing the date forward. After Thomas's accident, the structure was demolished entirely. His truck was recovered 2 days later, half buried in mud at the bottom of the ravine, its roof partially crushed by fallen debris. If he had remained trapped for even another 30 minutes, the rising river would have reached his chest. Thomas didn't talk much about that night afterward, not out of fear, but because he believed the story spoke for itself. When neighbors asked how he made it out of the ravine, he always gave the same quiet answer: "I just kept going." Doctors told him that if he had stopped to rest on the road, even once, he likely wouldn't have regained the strength to stand again. Hypothermia doesn't negotiate. It doesn't wait. It takes whatever pause you give it. He returned home a week later, walking slowly with a cane, wearing a heavier jacket than before. The storm passed, the bridge was gone, and life in Pierce continued as usual. But for Thomas, every small moment, warm coffee, dry socks, a quiet dawn, felt sharper, clearer, earned. Survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a long night, a hurting leg, a cold road, and a decision you make every minute: keep moving or give up. And Thomas didn't give up. If you've lived long enough, you know something younger people often don't. The hardest moments aren't always loud. They're the quiet ones, the cold ones, the ones where you keep going even when no one sees you. Stories like this remind us of the moments that shaped who we became. If you feel comfortable sharing, what's the toughest thing you ever had to push through? I'd be honored to read your story.